Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to another episode of Decoding the Polls, an initiative part of the Center for Public Policy Research, where we host various series of discussions, webinars, and podcasts around the election time. I'm Alina T. Sabu, Research Associate at CPPR, and your host for today's episode. And in today's episode of Decoding the Polls, we'll be looking closely at the return of Donald Trump to the White House and the possible implications for India. This is the third webinar in the US elections webinar series that we have held. The first webinar focused on the watershed analysis of the US elections, and the second one focused on the foreign, trade, and energy policies of Trump and Kamala Harris. Both of these are available on our YouTube channels. And today we have with us here Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan sir, who is a former ambassador and permanent representative of India to the United Nations, Vienna, and governor for India to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna. His previous postings were as India's ambassador to Austria and Slovenia, Deputy Chief of Mission, ambassador rank in the Embassy of India, Washington, High Commissioner of India to Kenya and permanent representative of India to the United Nations in Nairobi, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, New York, Ambassador to Fiji and 8 other South Pacific island states, and postings of the Indian missions in Tokyo, Thimphu, Moscow, New York, and Yangon. T.P. Sreenivasan sir served the Indian Foreign Service for 37 years and has nearly 20 years of experience in multilateral diplomacy and has represented India at a number of international conferences organized by the United Nations, the Commonwealth, and the Non-Aligned Movement. He's also an advisor to CPPR. I welcome you, sir, to another episode of Decoding the Polls. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, sir. And to join on the conversation, we have with us here today Mr. Richard M. Rossow, a senior advisor and holds the chair on India and Emerging Asia Economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In his role, he frames and shapes policies to promote greater business and economic engagement between both the countries, with a unique focus on tracking and engaging Indian states. He has been working on the US-India relations for over 25 years. He joined CSIS in 2014 after a long career in a range of private sector roles focused in India. Prior to CSIS, he served as a director for South Asia at McLarty Associates, leading the firm's work for clients in India and neighboring region. And he retains his affiliations with the firm. From 2008 to 2012, Mr. Rossow was with the New York Life Insurance Company, most recently as a head of international governmental affairs, where he developed strategic plans for the company's public policy and global mergers and acquisitions work and helped manage the firm's policy issues in India. From 1998 to 2008, Mr. Rossow served as the deputy director of the US-India Business Council, the world's leading advocacy group on behalf of strengthening economic ties between United States and India. While at USIBC, he managed the Council's policy group in the energy, information technology, insurance, media and entertainment, and telecommunication sector. Mr. Rossow received his BA from Grand Valley State University in Michigan. Thank you so much, Mr. Rossow, for joining us from US.
It's great for CPPR. Thanks for having me.
We also have with us here today J. Paul Zachariah, Program Officer, Chairman's Office at CPPR. He works with the Chairman on strategic development of CPPR and building partnerships. He is deeply interested in international relations and rights for the same. I welcome you, Paul, to today's episode.
Thank you so much, Lina.
And in today's episode, we'll be focusing on Donald Trump's return to the White House and the possible implications for India. Donald Trump's return to the White House will mark a significant political shift in the United States. This era is ushering in a fresh set of policies that will have deep implications both domestically and internationally. And in this webinar, we'll be exploring that deeply. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Alina. It's good to have another episode of Decoding the Polls, where we have been looking at the US presidential elections of 2024. Today with us, we have a very esteemed panel of people, or the right people who have been for many years deeply involved on diplomatic relations and also on business relations between India and the US. Ambassador Sreenivasan and Mr. Rossow, such a pleasure to have both of you on this program.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Can I just begin with a very basic question to kind of set the tone for today? Prime Minister Modi was one of the first, among the first global leaders to actually congratulate President Trump on his victory. So when you look at India-US relations under Modi 3.0 and Trump 2.0, what are your quick first impressions? If I can start with Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, sir, and then after that, Mr. Rossow.
Well, we have known for some time that Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump have a good relationship. Of course, the unpredictability in Trump is very well known. And therefore, you cannot say anything in absolute terms. When he recently described Mr. Modi, he said he's a very nice man, excellent person, very friendly, all the good adjectives. And at the end, he added that it can be very tough sometimes. Some I am not exactly remembering the words, but to indicate that it's not all that going to be, it's not going to be all that smooth. So you should not expect, in any case, a kind of predictable, continuous, good relationship. There will be hiccups, there will be problems, because Mr. Trump is out to change the world altogether. So there will be so many aspects in which there could be, nuances will be very different from between them. So I would expect that it will be a smooth ride, but at the same time, particularly on trade relations, on which Mr. Rossow is an expert. I'm not. Particularly in trade relations, we expect that there will be some trouble on the way. But certainly on China and also on his vision of Asia or India Pacific and Quad and so on. And these things, I think, will have a steady kind of relationship. And also arms supplies, not giving money to Pakistan. Some of these things are positive elements in Trump's Trump 1.0. So we can expect to have a reasonably good relations between the two of them, and therefore between India and the United States. That's the general picture.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. We look back and we remember the warm tidings the two leaders had, which is right. And security really was the major underpinning for that. I think a lot of the world, including India, had wanted to see the United States take a little bit more of an aggressive approach regarding some of the challenges that we see with China's rise. And, to see a president kind of cast off this kind of slow progression of facing the China threat in military terms and in trade and economic terms. I think for a lot of our partners, it really added a little bit of ballast to the relationship. But as Ambassador Sreenivasan correctly said, we kind of forget, but there wasn't actually like a medium intensity trade war during that period as well. The Modi government, when it first came to office a little over 10 years ago, and this Make in India initiative and a lot of the initial policies they did to support that, saw areas of like higher tariffs and domestic manufacturing mandates. And for President Trump, who was looking to fight the world on trade, India presented a pretty meaty target for that because of some of these policies that the Modi government had introduced. So, you saw the United States revoke preferences that were given to India, along with other developing countries, for zero duty access to the United States market under a program called the Generalized System of Preferences. When Trump announced global duties on steel and aluminum as a national security imperative, India was hit particularly hard by that. And India initiated responsive duties on a range of American products because of that. So, in the details, there was a lot of trade tensions, as Ambassador Sreenivasan hinted at. But at the leader level and the fact that they got along so well, it really, we're able, just like we've seen lately, to look at the two sides of the ledger and say there's a lot more positive than there's negative, even in the rough days. I think also we can expect that some of the areas that have proven to be points of tension in recent years, when U.S. officials would raise concerns about social issues in India, that's not part of President Trump's agenda. So I think some of these things you've seen on reports on religious tolerance and things like that are a lot less likely to be those small pain points that pop up every once in a while. So a lot of good things, but I agree. I suspect that we'll have some trade tensions that we'll have to work through.
Sure. We will be definitely talking about trade relations and economic relations. But maybe I just want to begin with a little bit on the defense and strategic relations that we have seen between India and the US, especially in the Indo-Pacific, right? So now when we look at the relations that India and the US has, and the current context where President-elect Trump has actually proposed some names like Representative Lees or maybe Representative Mike Waltz or Senator Marco Rubio, who are kind of considered as China hawks, right? So how do you look at, what could be a possible change or no change in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategies under a new President Trump? Mr. Rossow, if you can begin.
Yeah, I think by and large, the main parameters of what we've seen in the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and the latter half of the Obama administration, I think will remain intact. The United States has become India's largest military exercise partner. We're increasingly a supplier of defense technology. But importantly, as a parallel to that, the United States has looked for innovative ways to try to accelerate the sharing of sensitive military technology to help India build its domestic industry. Not to say we got a lot of notable achievements on that, because, of course, trying to get private companies to offer up their intellectual property on defense manufacturing to a foreign partner, it's not the easiest thing to try to do. But you've seen successive administrations give it a pretty good push and try to see if we can make that happen. A lot of defense companies, irrespective of the sharing of IP, have actually been setting up defense manufacturing facilities in India. So a lot of those elements, have been there throughout multiple administrations of different stripes, including the last time that the Trump administration was in office. The area that really has me excited, I would say, is when you see not just practicing and the sales and transfer of technology, but in the last 4 years, we've seen a real dramatic uptick in real operational coordination. India joining Combined Maritime Force Bahrain. What we hear about is higher and deeper levels of intelligence cooperation and sharing, both in the land and maritime domains. Issues like Indian shipyards now allowing U.S. Navy vessels to dock there for repair and resupply. Exercises and defense sales are nice, and certainly you can ring those on the board, signing agreements that open up the door for operations. But to actually see operational integration in the field and real world elements is something that, I'd say when Ambassador Sreenivasan and I were working on this together in DC almost 30 years ago, was just a glimmer in the eye of the most hopeful folks. And now you've seen in the last few years, it's actually becoming a practical reality. This is as far as we go with any of our defense partners who are not treaty partners. So we continue to break innovative new ground. And some of the things on this, like the escalation of the Quad and things, are things that Trump himself actually embraced last time he was in office. But the area that, once again, that I feel that you may have a little bit more constraint, I think is going to be, how aggressively is the Trump administration going to pursue the transfer of technologies to strengthen India's own defense industrial base? If Trump is focused on bringing those jobs back home, that may be a declining priority for the administration. But the operational stuff that we've seen and the Quad, embracing the Quad, I suspect that's going to be very much front and center in the agenda.
Sure. I would just want you to hold your thought on the technology transfer part. I would take it up a little bit later. But since you mentioned about Quad, before I bring in Ambassador Sreenivasan, in 2025, India is expected to host President Trump and the other Quad leaders. Understand? So do you think the Quad could be, much more revitalized, with a different perspective under President Trump?
I don't know that it would be revitalized and a different perspective. You remember, I mean, the Quad existed only briefly after that massive tsunami in Asia, but then at the end of the Obama administration, they began meeting at the Joint Secretary, Assistant Secretary level. President Trump chose to elevate that to the minister level, and then Biden took that all the way to leaders level. A lot of the work streams have been evolving relatively slowly but steadily. And more recently, they've started to move a little bit more into security cooperation, which has not been part of the agenda originally. But when we talk about the four countries engaging on humanitarian relief, which is one of the work streams, typically our navies are the first responders for maybe major catastrophes, Coast Guard cooperation, so there's some real areas that we see up front now on security cooperation. And the Quad kind of serving two different purposes. One is, how can the Quad members work together to help each other? And how can they work collectively to provide benefit across the Indo-Pacific? Maybe that second element, I don't think that the Trump administration was as focused on supporting international assistance to developing countries, things like that. Maybe you'll see a little bit less kind of focus in terms of the Quad providing benefits to others as the immediate. But I don't suspect you're going to see a dramatic change in the work plans there. these are core partners, and particularly of the four, Trump had a little contentious relationship with Australia, but both India and Japan were really among the most featured countries, and the ability for both India and Japan, I think, to help shape some of President Trump's thinking. If they're committed to the existing Quad work streams, they're going to have a pretty strong voice. Certainly, President Trump is pretty independent in the way that he thinks, but those are two countries, yours and Japan, that I think had some ability to nudge the agenda pretty substantially. So it's not something that a U.S. president will be able to decide unilaterally.
Sure. Ambassador Sreenivasan, I would like to come to you. Sir, can we have a little bit of lighting like we had earlier, so that to see you?
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to. Yeah, it's better.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to. Yes, sir.
Let us see the latest developments in India's relations during the last days of Biden. That will be a good indicator as to where we could go. Two things happened during our Prime Minister's visit to the U.S. He focused on a few things. He did not go on to various aspects. His earlier visit, there was this most important development was these emerging technologies, jet engines, etc. And that was one of the major, shall I say, developments in India-U.S. relations, in that the sense that we opened up, Ajit Doval's visit and so on. And I don't know how many of them has materialized, but this was done at Biden's time. And maybe he would not have done it an earlier period because he was not very clear about his own China policy and so on. So he was very careful. But since the change was the offing, or at least the possibility of a change in administration, I think he came a little more close to India, Biden, to make sure that India does not work in any way for a change in the administration. So that was the one thing. And the second one was Quad, because the Prime Minister didn't go into all the issues in India and US relations. He focused on Indians in the United States. That was important for the elections, and Quad, and the technology transfer. So these things were quite positive, more than what Biden had done in the past about India. So this could be a factor which would have encouraged him to show some new paths in the relationship, and that could be picked up by Trump. And the other thing is China. We have had a sudden improvement in India-China relations soon after the elections, or even before the elections. And the fact that the disengagement in Ladakh suddenly came through. For many months, nothing was happening. And so why did it come through so soon? Was there a change of heart on the part of the Chinese? Or was it in anticipation of Trump coming to power? Because both the Chinese and the Americans may have felt that some indication should be given to the new administration. And that is why, even though it is not very clear as to where was the disengagement, what remains, Government of India is very guarded about this. There is no public explanation as to what's happening, whether movement has started, etc. But I also see this as an indication of the kind of things to expect under Trump. You would certainly want China-India relations to be stabilized, and at the same time improved relations with the U.S. So these are the the indications, because Trump has really not spoken about India in much detail. But China, we know, will be of advantages to us. Quad will be advantageous to us. And Quad, I think we have made some, our rigidity about Quad not being a military alliance has been loosened a little bit. Jaishankar was more friendly to Quad this time than ever before, and indicating that it is not just COVID-19 and climate change. The indications from the foreign minister, our external affairs minister, was that we are moving more towards security cooperation. We used to pretend that this was all COVID and climate change and very constructive kind of things. India was steering clear of any kind of security arrangements.
Right.
But this meeting in Biden's hometown, and that indicated that we are moving towards a little stronger Quad, which would, of course, be very positive from Trump's point of view. So these are the kind of indications that India's relations with the U.S. would be much better than what it was under Biden. Because Biden and Kamala Harris had all these worries about India's democracy and India's press freedom and various things. And that was a kind of an irritant. But that will disappear, and we'll focus more on security cooperation. So these are some indications which Trump might pick up, I expect.
Sure. If we can bring this to you again, Mr. Rossow, starting with the logistics exchange memorandum of agreement, right, from 2016, then you had another agreement in 2018, then 2020, then in 2023, you've got the Indus-X. I believe you also had mentioned that. So do you think under, the same query I had for Ambassador Sreenivasan also, under Trump, you can see there'll be a much more renewed effort in terms of the 2+2 dialogues that you have and the major defense partner tag that India has?
Yeah, a lot of the agreements that we signed, when you think about some of the drivers and motivations behind a Trump administration, I don't think any of the agreements that we've signed are contrary to what I think the administration believes they were elected to do. So, for instance, some of the agreements that we signed on logistics interoperability, geospatial cooperation, communications technologies related to defense. These are all things that, frankly, in a good day, are actually going to improve America's ability to export different types of technology to India. The ability to share items that we only do for our closest partners. So for a president that's going to be very focused on domestic industry and exports, that's an area where security cooperation and the president's agenda for domestic constituency actually has really good overlap, and it helps to, I think, to create a virtuous cycle to some extent. Similarly, some of the other agreements that we signed to allow Indian liaison officers and American defense commands, India allowing U.S. observers at the Information Fusion Center in Gurugram. These, again, there's nothing in these elements that are contrary to what President Trump believes he was elected to do for the American public per se, and they all have meaningful contributions for what the United States and India can do in terms of regional security. Now, yeah, when you talk about the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has really become a vehicle to try to find ways to expedite the transfer of technology to India to boost India's defense manufacturing, there's going to be some challenges in the thrust and priority that we've seen for that. I suspect that the initiative on critical and emerging technologies will remain alive. And I say that because, with the National Security Advisor, who's been nominated, he was co-chair of the India caucus. I believe he's going to try to keep the good things alive that India wants to see. Although the emphasis behind transfer of technologies for Indian defense manufacturing may be downplayed a little bit. Indus-X, this idea about getting our startups to work together, I think is a relatively safe space. These companies don't have a big export book yet, so I don't think President Trump is going to look at that and say, we're going to lose American jobs by cooperation in that space. Instead, our defense startups, you might actually see Indian companies investing in the United States to be able to tap into U.S. opportunities in the defense industry as well. So some elements of transfer of technology on ISET, I think, are at risk. Other elements, the agreements we've signed, ones that we might look at proactively, and some of the startup work, I think, is going to be very much protected and encouraged.
Since you mentioned about the ISET, in terms of the semiconductor supply chain, do you think with U.S. cooperation, India can be a major hub for the global supply chain in terms of semiconductor? And do you think, given the America First policy that we have, how much do you think that would be possible in the new presidency?
Yeah, there's a meaningful, although really limited role that the U.S. administration plays in encouraging companies in some of these strategic sectors to consider investing in India. Having that encouragement from the White House is nice, but at the end of the day, a semiconductor firm investing in India, and this goes back to, as you pointed out in the beginning, a lot of my programs work on state level policymaking. You can't land a semiconductor fab unless you've got access to reliable electric power, unless you've got access to clean water that the municipal systems bring and deliver, or you carve out boutique infrastructure that services some of these novel investments India's been looking to land. So far we've seen two states in India, Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, that have been probably the most forward-leaning in trying to help carve out some of this boutique infrastructure to land some of these investments, which otherwise would have been difficult for India to bring in. The challenges behind running a successful semiconductor fab, when you talk about the access to capital equipment, the access to supplies, some of the infrastructure needs that a company like that would need on water and electricity, even the workforce issues are going to be challenges. But I'd say we have to look back 5 years from now and see whether or not it worked. But you do see a range of American companies encouraged by the government-to-government dialogue taking a risk and a bet on India. Of course, a lot of it's for the aspirational future. We look at the numbers. India is about to become the third largest economy in the world. It is already the largest population in the world and will remain so forever. The fastest growing large economy in the world. So, yeah, some of the constraints on infrastructure and labor force are challenging, and we don't yet know if these investments are going to work. But companies are willing to take that bet and a bit of a risk. Losing a bit of momentum with the Trump administration, I think less encouraging of outbound investment is, it's a bit of sand in the gears. But ultimately, these investments are really driven by what's happening in India. So I think India still has a chance to land these investments successfully and maybe build on that with other ones, even if the United States government isn't cheerleading that effort quite as much.
Sure, sure. Okay, it is
Well,
better.
one point I want to bring up at this point in time, since we're also talking about trade, etc. President Trump had, as president, reservations about trade and tariff in India. He said India is a king of tariffs, while China is an emperor. So it was only a matter of scale for him. And with the Chinese, he was willing to have a trade war. So, and that is the problem that might come up. And do you think that would be a real risk of his looking at our tariff rates and doing something about it, which would affect our trade relations? What do you think?
Yeah, my impression, I think you're right. You've seen the Modi government a little bit less aggressive on raising tariff rates and a little bit less aggressive on some of these mandatory local manufacturing programs that they introduced in their first term in office. But there's other elements like these quality control orders where you need source level reviews about whether manufactured products meet standards in India. So there still are some areas that I think, if a company feels that they're losing market access because of a Indian policy and they bring that up to the Trump administration, the Trump administration is ready to fight with anybody on trade. So I think the ability, even though there's a little bit less reason to pick up that fight, but the Trump folks, I think, are going to be willing to look and pick fights any place they can for even the smallest of reasons. So I think there's a few areas of target, but again, I don't think that's going to derail the good things that are happening at the leader level and some of the work on security cooperation. So yeah, a little bit of sand in the gears, but not anything that I think we can't work through and work past.
Since we talked about trade and tariff, Mr. Russo, in one of the commentaries that you had written, you talked about the Harley-Davidson tariffs that were. Are we seeing a trend where domestic policies are shaping foreign trade policies? Is that how it's going to be?
Yeah, thinking back to some swing states in the Midwest, including where I grew up in Michigan, which had been a Democrat-leaning state, for most of my life, and two of the last three elections they went for Trump. It's because you've seen a real departure of a lot of the manufacturing that was there. It was the auto hub of the United States and practically the auto hub of the world, and suddenly, it's just not anymore. And people that are there wondering what's next. Is there hope? And so for a president, in Trump that on the campaign trail, talks about going after these foreign countries that are playing a one-sided game on trade, and trying to convince American companies by brute force to stop investing overseas and reinvesting in the United States, slapping tariffs on foreign goods to try to provide some space for American manufacturers to be able to be more competitive. Those are, I think, fundamentals. We don't know with the president who sometimes is kind of erratic on policy. I mean, I think back to the last time he was in office, we'd all wake up in the morning and check Twitter to find out what new policy announcements the president put on social media as kind of that first wink and a nod that something was going to move. So we don't know exactly all the actions they're going to take. And we don't know how much Congress is going to oppose the agenda. While they're Republican, the fact that Trump is a lame duck already, for some, I would think centrist Republicans, they may be less inclined on supporting maybe some crazier ideas that the administration puts out there. But we know these fundamental drivers: rebuilding American industry, slowing imports as much as they can. And so I think we can count on those drivers. We just don't always know which policies those are going to kind of trigger.
Yeah, sure. I just want to, Sreenivasan sir, I hope
Yes,
I'm
okay.
audible. So I just want to bring in, since we talked about Twitter and X, a key discussion point in the Trump campaign was on illegal immigration, right? And then now, do you think with Elon Musk, who actually kind of advocates for highly skilled workers coming in, and at the same time, when we have someone who is seemingly anti-immigrant, like Stephen Miller, who's I think will be appointed as the deputy chief of policy. In terms of the H-1B visa, Sreenivasan sir, do you think India is going to face problems?
I don't think so, because the focus of President Trump is illegal aliens. He's talking about criminals and people who eat dogs and cats and so on. So I don't think we should be worried about that. But I suspect that in these millions of people that he's talking about deportation, I'm afraid there might be some Indians. There are no figures. So that I'm a little bit concerned, because if he says he's going to bring the army in and throw these people out, and that will be a big calamity. Where will they go? And it'll be a big issue. And in that, if there are thousands of Indians caught in that illegal thing, then there could be a kind of problem here. How are we going to take them back? And where will they take them? We may not even know where they come from in India. So that could be a problem. But as far as professional visas are concerned, I don't think there will be any problem with Musk being around. So on that, we are not worried. But in the deportation case, nobody knows how many Indians will be there. And that can create a social unrest in the country if they are all to be deported here. And that is something of concern to us. But I suppose he says these things, but he may not really implement them the way in which he is now declaring it about illegal aliens. So, but as far as we are concerned, I think the technology visas will continue to flow. And that's a necessity for them as much as for us.
Sure. Sure. If we can move on to an entirely different geopolitical aspect here, in terms of the Middle East. Of late, I was just reading some writings by Indian analysts of prominent think tanks here, that President Trump might likely double down and kind of try to leverage India's role in the Middle East in terms of whether it is I2U2 or the IMEC corridor that is planned. Sreenivasan sir, if I can begin with you first, how do you think President Trump might be looking at the whole role of India in the Middle East in terms of I2U2 or even if it is IMEC?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, in the Middle East, he doesn't consider India to be of any significance, I think. Particularly after we normalized our relations with Israel, and it is going well. And even on Palestine, we have softened our approach. So, but I don't think we have a role of the kind that is expected immediately to end this war. There, I don't think India will come in at all. It is between his relationship with Israel and the Palestinians. And he, of course, is a supporter of Israel. We know what he did with Jerusalem and so on. So we would not be either an obstacle to his Palestine policy, or we can not expect anything, any particular role for us. We have tried many times to have a role in the Middle East, but it has not worked. Israel did not ever object to India being involved in it, but they didn't expect India to do anything. They were good relations with India, and they will leave it at that. And they know that as far as Palestinians are concerned, we also have a soft corner. And with Iran coming in on the side of Palestine, and that also will not make any difference to Indian policy in the Middle East. So I think on the Middle East, he will be dealing with Netanyahu and Iran rather than us. I don't expect India to be in any way a partner or an opponent in this particular case. Russia, of course, may be a different story. That will come later.
Sure, sure. If we can come to Mr. Rossow, you had recently written, a commentary, U.S. India under Trump 2.0, return to reciprocity. I just want to pick one sentence from there and maybe pick your brains on that. You have written most of the tensions with India during the Trump administration came from the two countries' similar approaches to trade. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on a little bit specifics of what you actually were trying to point out here?
Yeah, both of our countries have massive trade deficits with the world. The United States has the single largest individual trade deficit in terms of dollar amounts. And among large countries, India has the largest trade deficit in the world in terms of the trade deficit as a percentage of GDP. So when both leaders, and I know certainly there's a lot of trade economists that will say you can't just look at imports minus exports, it's more nuanced than that in terms of value addition and such. But leaders do. That's what they look at, the top line number on imports minus exports, and that's what drives a lot of decision making on trade policy. So the fact that both of our countries, face a crisis where the United States has seen industry and manufacturing leaving the country, and India wants aspirationally to attract industry and manufacturing. There is a real tension. I remember when Trump was in office last time, you'd have a lot of well-meaning diplomats getting up and saying that Make in India and Make America Great Again can work together. It's really not the case. I think at that time, both leaders felt that everything from mining the materials to final products should be done in country. I think India has actually developed a more nuanced approach, though, in recent years. I mean, you've seen India switch dramatically from how it looks at trade. And I think the understanding that, lower trade barriers actually are important for becoming a hub in global supply chains. I think the Modi government in its second term really began to kind of understand how true that line actually is. So I think India's position on this has changed a little bit since the last time Trump was in office. But I suspect that the Trump administration, whether it's from the original minings or process or intermediate goods or final goods, they're going to want to see it all land and end up back home. So our trade deficits are huge drivers of our policies. And I think particularly in the United States, the idea that everything from the original product all the way to the final good should be done domestically, that'll be some of the underlying drivers for some of this consternation and tensions that I see happening.
Sure, sure. Can I bring in Ambassador Sreenivasan sir, with your vast experience in the IAEA? Do you think there'll be a renewal of a civil nuclear deal between India and the United States? Because right now we're talking about the small modular reactors, right? There's a lot of talk between companies in the U.S. In investing in India on these small reactors. So do you think there could be some renewed activity on that part?
Well, I don't know whether you know this, that in 2017, I broke the news to the world that there will be no nuclear trade between India and the United States. Somebody in the White House told me very, very bluntly that this nuclear agreement with India is not going to lead to any kind of strengthening of Indian nuclear capability because of the United States. It came as a big surprise to me, but it turned out to be right, because till today, there is no American reactor anywhere in India. We still only have Kodankulam, which is our foreign reactor. So they were very clear in that. It was explained to me that we gave you the nuclear deal to enable you to buy from others, but we are not going to sell you. And this they said even before the issue of nuclear damages came up. Of course, eventually what happened was India said the compensation should come from the producer and not the operator, and that was a big issue that Prime Minister Modi tried to remove, but he did not succeed in that. And so nuclear cooperation between the United States at a standstill. They only facilitated it, but they were not going to be partners of India in this. So I don't think that will change under Trump, because they are sensitive to this, that they do not want to appear to be strengthening India's nuclear capability because of the whole issue of the NPT. And therefore, I don't think there will be any great improvement in our nuclear relationship. And in the IAEA itself, that's a major point that people understand. And so I do not expect that there will be any kind of enhanced cooperation with the United States on nuclear issues.
So because one of the reasons was also just looking at these latest news reports about these small modular reactors, and then probably there was some discussion that could happen. Do you think you know even that is also not a possibility, even if it is about reactors which cannot be converted for defense purposes?
Yeah, but that's the feeling I got, and it was a kind of absolute terms they were spelling it out to me. So at that time it was big news, but now we know that it is on back burner nuclear cooperation, because there has not been any talk of any kind of coordination or because the membership of the NSG itself is stuck, and the Americans are not able to do anything about it. So the great expectations which came out of the India-U.S. nuclear deal have remained somewhat unfulfilled. So unless there is a new initiative, particularly because of Putin had come up with this new nuclear doctrine, I haven't understood it yet. But that may have an implication. And that's why I said on the Russia-Ukraine thing, I think we may have a role to play. Because if there is a ceasefire, for example, or Trump stops the war in one day, or things like that, then India-US relations will get better. This particular irritant about Russia will disappear if there is at least a ceasefire. So the whole idea of India being neutral and that being not moral and so on, those arguments they have, and that may relax a little bit if there is a ceasefire on Russia-Ukraine. That is where I think some improvement will be there. So our Russia relationship will not come in the way of Trump being friendly with us, and that's an expectation I have if the war ends.
Understood. Understood. Mr. Russo, would you like to comment in terms of the expectations that probably some in the private sector in India have about the small modular reactors that can probably open a new era of partnership between India and the US?
Ambassador Sreenivasan was right. I mean, we can see the potential there, but with liability issues and the fact that one of the major U.S. suppliers, Westinghouse, went through bankruptcy, and GE Hitachi had some challenges of its own, where the slow process in developing any kind of nuclear reactors anywhere was moving extremely slowly. I know that there was a small bit of back channel conversation between the White House and the Modi administration leading up to the election, hoping that there'd be some pathway they could figure out to take another run at liability. You remember, I mean, the liability law passed at the end of the UPA government, and it was made it prohibitive for American companies. They set up that Tiger team not long after the Modi government came to office during the Obama administration to develop this insurance pool that the General Insurance Corporation would lead, but still that was seen by American suppliers as too expensive. I do think, some of the sectors that India is trying to land right now, when you talk about the developing of hydrogen, when you talk about semiconductor sectors like this that need vast, or data centers, all these sectors that need vast amounts of electric power. And, India is going heavy in renewables, but you got a lot of issues in India of intermittency. There's not a lot of storage, and weather forecasting still remains insufficient for understanding how much you can count on renewables. So baseload generation, you do see India a lot of times reverting back to coal. It would be great if nuclear can play a role there, especially again for some of these sunrise industries that India is looking to develop and to land. But yeah, I think under the current liability regime, it's really hard to imagine American companies feeling safe exporting technology. Um, so unless there's a concerted effort by the two administrations to figure out a better way around the liability issue, I think we're going to remain stuck for the time being. So yeah, no difference in my thoughts on that than Ambassador Srinivasan. I think we're kind of stuck at a difficult place. We see the promise, but it's been so darn hard to move anything forward and have any kind of commercial reality.
Sure, sure. If we can bring in a little bit of the regional alliances and partnerships that we have in terms of the RCEP or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity that was launched by President Biden in 2022. Ambassador Srinivasan, how do you look at these initiatives under President Trump?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not very very au fait with trade matters, particularly RCEP and what's likely to happen. There, the issue was China, basically, because China was turning it against us and gaining from it. So we shied away from. There are two views about it, whether we should go back to it, etc. But I don't know. I'm not really up to date on that. But on trade, as I indicated earlier, President Trump could be tough because of his general policy on tariffs. And he's, particularly because there's a huge economic crisis in the U.S. And he is very particular that, he said that he'll stop all imports from China, he'll do this and that and the other. So I don't know. I don't have a specific answer on that. But that is going to be a sore point in Trump's relationship with India, I think. But how will it emerge and what his priorities will be in terms of trade with China, that will have an impact on it. But it cannot be, I don't think it can be clearly defined at this stage.
Sure, sure. Mr. Rossow, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, Trump has said many times before that he's not a big fan of multilateral trade agreements. So
Yes.
we're not a party to RCEP, and I do hear some nascent chatter, at least in the media in India, that there might be some level of reconsideration on whether RCEP was good. But I think Ambassador Sreenivasan put his finger on it. India's major, the largest single component of its trade deficit is trade with China. So providing preferential market access for Chinese firms, and until the day when India thinks they're going to gain from that rather than lose, it's hard to imagine jumping into this regional trade agreement. With the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, there really wasn't going to be any serious trade liberalization that was envisioned under IPEF. So I don't think a lot of other countries, I think they kind of played along because it was the only thread that looked like the Biden administration cared about the word trade. I don't suspect a lot of our foreign partners even are going to really put a lot of pressure or attempt to put pressure on the Trump administration to keep that alive. So I would suspect it's at risk under a Trump administration. But it's not all sour. Trump himself has said that he doesn't believe in multilateral deals, but he likes bilateral deals. And they had some nascent conversations with a few partners during his last administration. Of course, they had such a difficult time because they weren't even expecting to win that time on getting key positions filled and creating and crafting and carrying out an agenda. This time around, they're moving a lot faster. So if they go back to this idea that individual trade deals with countries that are prioritized, and they can actually move on a little bit faster and get some momentum, you might see a little bit more positive trade policy, narrower, but probably going a little bit deeper than IPEF would have on real trade commitments. So there's a chance. I don't know that I'm going to say it's above 50%, but there's a chance that you might see the United States go back to old school trade deals that have real trade commitments, but they'll be narrower with individual countries. And who knows, maybe India ends up on that list because, as we talked about before, India is going to be, I think, prioritized in a small group of countries that'll get a lot of time and attention directly from the president. So there's a narrow strand I'm going to be watching closely to see if it burns bright and something good happens on trade in the lane that we're talking about today. But just conjecture. They haven't, of course, said that meaningfully out loud.
Sure, sure. I just have, we are almost close to an hour. I just have one final question for both of you. First, with staying on with Mr. Rossow, there was this news report from India that India is expected to be the second biggest draw for global investments. This was said by one of the top executives of a Wall Street bank. So how do you look at such a scenario? Do you think this is something that can happen?
It can happen. I don't know that it's going to happen in, say, the next 5 years. But, again, you look at the big picture numbers, the most populous country, soon to be the third largest economy, a huge domestic market. And to some extent, because of the announcement of some telecom companies on starting to leverage India more as a global supply chain base, you can see a pathway when a lot more investment starts to land. I do think, at the end of the day, of India's 28 states in my work, there's only a handful that wake up every day and work proactively to try to create that ecosystem and environment to land a lot of those big investments that would help India move from, let's say like number 9th or 10th in the world right now in terms of foreign investment to get up to that level where they're, first or second or third. There's still a big road to plow. In a good year, India will land maybe $40-50 billion in foreign direct investment. They had a bit of a spike in the middle of COVID where they got 70 billion in a 12-month period, but a lot of that was some of these block investments that were made in Reliance Geo because it looked like they were on the verge of becoming potentially a monopoly in India at one point. But India continues to hum along at 40-50 billion. we're talking about a sea change to get up to the top 2 or 3. They got to double and triple that. It's possible, get more states that are pulling at the oars, that are trying to land those investments, that are creating the kind of ecosystems that we see in places like Tamil Nadu and Gujarat and to some extent Maharashtra. So I know what the pathway looks like. I'd like to see the Modi government get back to some of its early work and challenging states to do better. And I was just in India last week, and I know that the Ministry of Commerce and Industry is looking at revisiting this ranking of Indian states' business environment, making it a little bit even more rigorous. So these are good things that I think will help India find its own pathway on meeting exactly what was predicted by the Citibank vice chairman.
Sure, sure. Ambassador Sreenivasan, sir, the final question to you. Since you mentioned about Russia and we see some new activity happening on that front, Trump had claimed that he will end the Russia-Ukraine war very promptly. How do you look at it in terms of the relationship that India has with both these countries? You did mention it very briefly earlier, but can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
No, because there is a sharp difference between India and the U.S. on Russia. That's not a secret. Because they're very concerned that we are too much involved with the Soviet Union and now with Russia, particularly in the less developed areas of old Soviet Union and so on. So there will not. But the problem of Ukraine and our position on it, and our trying to mediate it, etc. And on that, I think he'll be very suspicious. And so if there is a solution or a nearby solution which is created by Trump, and then the sharpness of differences between us on Ukraine will disappear. Because they are not happy at all that he went to Moscow and, a lot of things happened. And that must all be in his mind. And depending on his own progress with ending the war, this might reduce. That is the point I was making. Because otherwise, the difference is very sharp. We are not expressing it, but for them to feel that India is actually boosting Putin. But apparently, Putin is coming to India very soon. So we don't know what that will be. But if there is a thaw in the relationship or there is an end in the war, then it could be that particular irritant will disappear. That is the point I was making. But at the moment, there are no indications of that kind. Everybody is mediating there, and so we don't know who is going to get the Nobel Prize. So, Zelensky said everybody is trying for a Nobel Prize on our account, and that's being accused. Even our Prime Minister is being accused of doing that. So I think, but if there is a solution either way, Trump seems to have some plans about Russia. That is, give them some Ukrainian land, and also promise that Ukraine will not join the NATO. This kind of a package apparently he has. But how far it will go, we don't know. But what I'm saying is, if there is progress on that, and that will let off the kind of strain that we have in our relations with dealing with Russia, because all said and done, our dealings with Russia are very deep and expanding. And so, if there is no issue of the war, then it's quite possible that that kind of irritant, which is in the India-U.S. relations, will disappear, or at least it will become less. That was the point I was making, the positive point.
Sure, sir. Understood. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out your valuable time to join us in CPPR, where we're discussing about how we could look ahead in India-U.S. relations under Trump 2.0. Ambassador Sreenivasan, Mr. Rossow, such a pleasure to have both of you. Both of you have been well-wishers and long-time friends of CPPR. Thank you for all the support they've been giving us. Such a pleasure talking to you. Back to you, Alina.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
As we wrap up this insightful discussion with the expertise of our esteemed guest, Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan sir, and Mr. Richard M. Rossow, we have learned valuable insights on the possible implications for India with Trump's presidency. Thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas on US elections. And thank you, Paul, for all the valuable questions and points you have raised in this conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more discussions like these. For further analysis and comprehensive coverage of elections, make sure to visit CPPR's Decoding the Polls website. Your engagement is crucial to shaping the future of democracies in India and around the globe as well. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay engaged and stay informed.
Thank you.